Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Rick with Union Hill Baptist Church, and you are about to see our worship service for Sunday, May 31st. It is our first time regathering since the pandemic, so we hope that you enjoy this message called Down to the River as we look at the life of Jacob in the Old Testament. But before we do that, we welcome Miss Heather, who will be singing a very special song for us this morning, The Sweet, Sweet Spirit.
There's a sweet, sweet spirit in this place, and I know that it's the Spirit of the Lord. There are sweet expressions on each face, and I know that it's the presence of the Lord. Sweet Holy Spirit, sweet heavenly dove, you're right here with us, filling us with your love. And for these blessings, we lift our hearts in praise. Without a doubt, we'll know that we have been revived when we shall leave this place. There are blessings you cannot receive till you know Him in His fullness and believe. You're the one to profit when you say, I am going to walk with Jesus all the way. Sweet Holy Spirit, sweet heavenly dove, you're right here with us, filling us with your love. And for these blessings, we lift our hearts in praise. Without a doubt, we'll know that we have been revived when we shall leave this place.
I sure am glad these are up here. I was down there as Heather was singing, and I always reach in my pocket to get my glasses. And I reached over there, and they were gone, which reminded me yesterday I got into the funeral. We walked in with the family, and the other pastor and I sat down up front, and they announced a song that we would be singing. So I reached in my pocket, and there were no glasses, and I literally had to leave the funeral and run out to the truck and find my way to the out to the truck to get my glasses. So, Jimmy, give me 1 second, or Donnie, give me 1 second here. I've got a red light. It says on low battery. There we go. Now, switch over and see if I remembered how to do this correctly for our projection. Take just a moment here while we get our... We've forgotten how to do this. We haven't done it in 3 months. There we go. Welcome back, Union Hill. Give me just a little less. I'm hearing way too much of me, and I'm a little less. There we go. Thank you. Welcome back. It has been... You remember we actually came in that first week of talking about March 15th. and were unsure of what to do because it hadn't been announced, and enough of you expressed concern. Following that service, we announced. If you remember back then, they were talking about, we need to flatten the curve for about 2 weeks. And it took 12 weeks to get 2 weeks taken care of, but I'm not going to go off on that too much, but it is good to see you back. As I told you, I have been myself in 3 funerals during this time. Our nation has seen more than 100,000 people die. I've got a lot of swirling opinions and feelings about how we have handled this pandemic. But let us never look beyond the truth that there are many people who are suffering, many people who are hurting badly. Some of the connections that I'm able to make by way of Facebook are people that I went to divinity school with. I graduated in 2007, so I'm not so far removed. And one of my friends, Will Runyon, is a chaplain down in a relatively small town in Georgia where there was an outbreak. And in just over a 30-day period, Will held hands with 49 people as they died. He held an iPad using a FaceTime because families were not allowed to come in. So the only way that people could see their loved ones was for the chaplain to go in. And Will has been so deeply affected by this that he is dealing with what I would call PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. It has devastated his life. Another of my friends, Stacy, also a chaplain. I can't remember where. But because of how the numbers played out where she is, many hospitals, including our own hospital in Lynchburg, have had to furlough people. That's a fancy word saying they've lost their job for the time being. There were, they didn't have a rush of COVID patients, and so many other patients chose to stay home during this time. The hospital came to her and said, between the quarantine and you can't make contact with people and we have less patients in the hospital, we can't use you right now. And they sent her home. So apart from 100,000 deaths, there are so many people that have been affected in other areas of their life, and they don't know what tomorrow is going to hold. It has been a time both of challenge, but also a time of blessing. If you recall, back at Easter, we had to do our Easter services online, but I announced that Donna's son, he's ours, my stepson, but I claim him fully. Justin, being the manager of a store that didn't get to sell all of their candy, donated a lot of Easter candy to you. If you weren't paying attention on Facebook and you didn't come get some free candy, shame on you. I would like to confess that I ate 1 bag of little Twix bars, and that's all my diabetes would allow. But we gave some out to the families here. Hope you enjoyed that. Still had a case full of this stuff. So I talked with some of the leadership, we'll either try this or try that. And it came to mind the school lunch workers there in Rustburg. They are serving families day after day. So I was hauling mulch one day and set a box in the truck and literally came by and said, look, I know you don't know me, but I know the principal here. We've been talking. Our church received the blessing of some, Easter candy. It's new, it's fresh, and we would like to give it to you workers and hope you enjoy it. Now, the interesting thing that happened is in the midst of all this, one of those workers, thank you so much. We're trying to serve families. Nobody thought about serving us. And this one lady went, I know who you are. And I'm like, uh-oh, this could go really interestingly. I know who you are. And she spoke about a blessing that she had received through the ministry of this church, through one of the funerals I had done. And it's amazing when you think that all that you're doing has been shut down and you find that you're able to reach others. So that is a part of all of our efforts. And I hope that you have found those moments of surprise. I have been deeply blessed by our online Bible study and by the new participation that we have had in that. I hope that you will take advantage of that. Now, the future is always new. It's always different. But I think when we talk about the future right now, we know that it's different on a level we have not experienced. You hear people talking about, well, when all this gets back to normal. And what we're realizing is, yes, there will be normal, but it will be a new normal. It will not be the kind of normal we have had before. Things are not going to go back to the way they were. And in fact, in many ways, they should not go back to the way they were. I am so pleased to hear the support as I've interacted with the people here to continue our online presence. We should not be satisfied just to minister to us. But I do recognize that when we face transitions, especially forced transitions, things can be awfully unsettling. There is something very comfortable about routine, about knowing what's coming and what to expect. There's something a little, if you'll allow me to use the term, nauseating when life throws us a curve and we have to make a lot of adjustments. This is a time of adjustment, and we are feeling that tension that comes when change is forced upon us. Change can feel very threatening. When we are threatened, we can feel fear. And whenever there is fear, we realize we have to make some choices. My father told me about a particular instance in his life and in his career. Mom and Dad were married in 1948. I love telling that my mom they were married in September, on September the 16th. And on September the 16th, my mom was 16. And on September the 17th, my mom turned 17. That's how I remember the wedding anniversary and the birthday. She was 16th on the 16th and 17th on the 17th. And they had grown up in a farming community. Tobacco farming was the way, but Dad had no aspirations to be a tobacco farmer. He had just left the military, where he was the administrative officer on the ship where he served, a non-com, but the company clerk, so to speak. And when he came home, he started doing kind of jobs that took advantage of his administrative skills. So through the 50s, he worked for a trucking company, and he finally got to work for the Winston-Salem Journal. He was in advertising and advertising sales. And, by 1951, they had one child, and then by 55, they had two. And through the 50s, he was growing spiritually. He got involved deeply in his church. And in 1953, he answered a call and announced that he was announcing his call into ministry. For the next 7 years, he continued to work, and he did fill-in work. That's what young preachers do. In 1960, Dad was called to a little church called Mountain Park, between Winston-Salem and Elkin, North Carolina, if you've ever been down there. Mountain Park is truly a crossroads where you have a country store on one side and a church on the other and a school across from them. And it was a good time. He saw his family growing. He saw his church growing. People were being saved. There was a little bit of a new excitement in the church. I'm not supposed to tell this part. He did... In his first few months there, he did a number of funerals. And he said, I had no clue at the time, but the Lord was taking care of the problems in the church. But a year, 2 years, somewhere early on in that ministry, the newspaper heard that he was preaching on Sunday. And he was called in to his manager's office, and they had this term. You've heard it, moonlighting. We have a policy here, no moonlighting. If you work for us, you can't work somewhere else, even if it's for a church. Now, the church was his calling. There's a deep sense of direction there. But the Winston-Salem Journal paid his salary. Churches in 1950s and early 1960s did not provide a living wage, or very few of them did, and this was one of them. They did provide him a parsonage. Dad said that was the coldest house he's ever lived in his life. They built a nice house and didn't put 1 ounce of insulation in it. In fact, it was kind of funny. The first winter there, they moved in 1960. Some of you might remember. I guess it happened here. Remember the January Wednesday snows when it snowed every Wednesday? That's where he moved in. And my older brothers told about the snow got so deep they tunneled under it. Dad said, I built a fire in the fireplace, and about 15 minutes later, he ran up to the store where all the deacons would sit eating nabs and drinking Coca-Colas. And he said, boys, you better get down there. The parsonage is on fire. What had happened, the guy who laid the chimney, they put a wooden form and lay the bricks around it. When he got to the top, he never took the wooden form out. The thing caught on fire and scared them all to death. But they lived through it. But when Dad was told that you've got to make a choice, tomorrow's going to be different. Either you're with us or you're not. And he wondered, can I feed my family? Much like our own parsonage over here, the church then had a separate garage. And in the back of the garage was it was designed as a utility room, and the previous pastor had kind of remodeled it and put his desk in there for an office. So Dad went to that little office, that little closet, and he closed the door. And he said, I was determined not to come out until I had an answer. Lord, what do I do? He wrestled with God. Have you ever been there? I know you've not worked for the Winston-Salem Journal. You've not lived in the parsonage probably. But my point is, have you ever been there when tomorrow had a deadline to it? Whatever normal will be, it's going to be different. And you've got to make a choice, and you're going, but I don't know what to do. Perhaps I'm threatened. Perhaps I'm even a little afraid. You know that you need an answer, and it's an answer that you can't come up with on your own. Those are times when we must wrestle with God. I've entitled this sermon this morning, Going Down to the River. It's from Genesis chapter 32, and we'll be looking at the scripture in just a few moments, and I'll be posting it up. I did remember how to get that up on the screen, so we'll be doing that. But we're looking at the life of Jacob. Jacob, who is the grandson of Abraham. Abraham, that father of the faith. He followed God's call, and God led him to a new land. There he had a son called Isaac who would inherit the blessings of God. And then Isaac had Jacob and Esau, twin sons. Esau is such an interesting story. Esau was delivered first, and little Jacob's hand was grabbing hold of his brother's heel. That was the story of his life. He was always grabbing at somebody else. And the name Jacob literally means trickster or deceiver. And if anyone has ever deserved their name, it was Jacob. If you remember the account, Jacob was kind of a mama's boy. Now, Quentin Nick's sitting under Dad's arm, so that's Dad's boy. You know what that makes you? It was kind of a dichotomy. Esau, he was man's man. He went out and he hunted. He went out and he did manly things. Jacob stayed home and liked to cook, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just kind of painting a paradox here. And one day Esau came in, and in Jewish family structure, as the older brother, he would receive what's called the birthright. If you had 5 children, you would divide up the inheritance 6 ways. Or if you had 2 children, as Isaac did, you would divide up your goods 3 ways. The oldest son got a double portion. He got the birthright of Dad's stuff. So if you had 10 children, he would have got 2 portions of 11, or 1/11. But in his case, he would get 2/3 of his dad's goods. But Esau's out hunting one day, and he's gone all day, and there's not even a squirrel moving. And he comes home, and he's hungry, and guess where Jacob's at? He's in the kitchen. And I can just see it happening. Boy, I'm hungry, and Jacob's going. He's pushing that aroma over there. It's just pea soup, lentil soup. It's beans. But when you're hungry, beans is pretty good eating. And Esau, the guy who's supposed to bring home the steak said, I don't have a thing. I'd sure like to have some of what you got. And Jacob, being Jacob, said, well, I'll give you some of what you got, of what I've got, but I want you to give me some of what you got. What are you talking about, brother? I tell you, I'll feed you today, and on the day when our Father divides his good, sell me your birthright. And he goes, what good is an extra portion then when I'm starving today? Buddy, I'll trade you. And after he had eaten, he started to do some computing, some computations. You remember how Jethro Bodine would do alt, and alt is alt? Well, those alts began to add up, and he realized, I have traded away a substantial thing. And there's a little Jacob, I got him. A little later, Isaac is an old man and he's preparing to die. One of the other things that would happen is the father would place a blessing upon each of his sons. And Mom was in cohorts with this, and Isaac tells his son Esau, go out and hunt and find some wild game. I'd love to have a taste of whether it's a venison steak or whatever it happens to be. I'd like to have, you can cook it up so good. Why don't you go hunt and find me something special, and I'll eat that one last man's meal, a manly man's meal, and I'll give you my blessing. And while he's out, Mom says, tell you what, let's go kill one of the animals from the flock, and I'll cook it, and while I'm cooking it, you skin the animal and put its skin on your arms, because your brother's a hairy fella. And Jacob comes in, and Isaac said, who is this coming so soon to me? Well, it's your son Esau. Well, it doesn't sound like Esau. Isaac's eyes had grown dim. He said, well, come over here and let me feel of you. And Jacob had that skin on his arm, and here, Dad, feel. He said, boy, that feels like my son Esau, and it smells like my son Esau. You must be Esau. And Jacob blessed his first son, his second son, but as if it were his first. And then Jacob grabs the dishes and gets out of town, and a few minutes later, in comes his older brother, Esau. Jacob said, who are you? He said, well, Dad, I'm your son Esau. I brought the wild game you wanted. And old Isaac began to shake, and he said, oh, son, you've been tricked again. I have blessed your brother. And it's such a poignant scene. Dad, is there no blessing for me? That was Jacob. Now, as you might imagine, Esau did not think very highly of Jacob. In fact, he was kind of, if you've ever seen those Godfather movies, you remember that second movie when Al Pacino's character is upset because his brother betrayed him, and he looks at his hitman and he goes, I don't want anything to happen to him as long as my mother is alive. Esau kind of let it be known that when my parents are no longer alive and Dad's gone, we're going to get Jacob. Mom gets wind of that, and Jacob runs for his life. He goes to his uncle's house, his mom's brother, and boy, does he get a taste of his own medicine. His uncle, Laban, has two daughters. One of them was kind of average looking, and the other one, she was an eye catcher. And Jacob looked at her and she looked at him. He said, I'm going to marry that girl. And he goes to his uncle and said, give me your daughter, Rachel, to be my wife. I think the world of her. And he said, well, you should work for her. And they agreed he would work for her for 7 years. And on his wedding night, you can bet Laban had quite the drinking material there. And Jacob got really happy. And afterwards, they were to go to the honeymoon suite. But you see, during the celebrations, she had to do what you're doing this morning. She had to wear the facial coverings that is common even in the Middle East to this day. And they went into the master suite, and she blew out the candles. And he went to bed supposing that he was with Rachel. And he consummated the marriage and woke up in the morning, and What have you done to me? And he ran to his father-in-law. You've tricked me. His father-in-law says, well, she's the older, and it's just wrong to give away the first daughter, the younger daughter, when the older one hadn't get married. If you'd like to marry the other one, you can work 7 more years and get her too. You think he didn't know exactly what it felt like to be tricked? To have to pay a price? Events continue to unfold, and there comes a time when Jacob wants to take his wives and all of the attending servants and all of the flocks that he has grown over the years. The Lord was good to Jacob and blessed him. And he says, I need to go home. That's where God has called our family to be. There's just one thing. Back home is Esau. You know, the brother who said, I'm going to kill you until you are dead. That's killing you a lot. That's about as much as you can go. So we come to a place in the scripture where Jacob is getting close to home, and he goes down to the river. Genesis chapter 32, we take up our reading in the 22nd verse. That night Jacob got up, that's the last night before meeting Esau. He got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Then the man saw that he could not overpower him. He touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that the hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. The man asked him, what is your name? Jacob, he answered. The man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. I'm still getting that scratchy throat, so forgive me. I call this message Down to the River because if you don't see it in this story, you certainly see it in your life. There are those times when we find no answers on our own and we have to turn to the divine. We have to turn to God, but it doesn't feel like a very pious act. It doesn't feel like a very noble act. Sometimes it feels like a fight. It feels like a wrestling match, and it feels like one that costs us all that we are. I want you to think about times in your own life when you have experienced uncertainty. Think of times in life when you have felt threatened, when tomorrow would be different and you didn't know what it would look like. It's much like we are dealing with both in this virus as well as with the growing civil unrest around us. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. Some people go out and think there's no risk to me, and others are scared to death. I've got a distant family member that, bless her heart, she is in true hiding. She's terrified that if she has any contact with anyone, she's going to get the virus. Not only get the virus, but she's going to get it and die. Have you ever been afraid? Have you ever been threatened? We are torn by violence. The events on the streets of Minneapolis have now spilled in protest across the streets of our nation. And not only are people expressing, justifiably so, the outrage that racial hatred would kill someone. As I've watched the video, I feel that, why didn't someone do something? Why didn't a citizen arrest the police? And again, I have to be very careful that I don't let my rage fester into something very unhealthy. But what are we going to do? What are we going to do when violence threatens our homes and our family? And like Jacob, who was preparing to meet Esau, who was not only mad, he was good and mad. Sometimes we go before God and say, there are no answers. And we want to grasp hold of him and kind of wrestle. I need a resolution. There are some lessons here that we need to draw from this passage, or some lessons that I've drawn from this passage. And some of those I'd like to share with you this morning. When Jacob went down to the river to pray, the scripture tells us before he went back alone, he cleared everything away. He sent his wives away. He sent his servants away. He sent his possessions away. One of the battles that we face in our life is the battle of distraction. Life is busy. I think one of the benefits of this time of COVID-19 for some people was it forced them to slow down, especially in those first weeks of the stay-at-home order. I realized that there were times when I had nothing particular to do in town, but I might just get up and go to town. Go to the hardware store, or to the tool store, or to whatever store, and just get out or go out and grab a bite to eat when there is food in the refrigerator. I realize that we are prone to movement. And sometimes we need to remove the distractions to allow a holy stillness come into our heart, into our lives. Jacob could not find clarity, a clarity of mind and a clarity of heart, until he removed those distractions that were all around him. And when he met, the story says a man met him. That's a literary way of saying God met Jacob where he was at. If the story had said God came down, you know what we would have said? What does he look like? Does he have a beard? Does he have a white flowing robe? What does God look like? And then we would have got into theological debates. Can a man meet with God? God meets his people, but he always meets his people in ways that we can understand. We cannot raise ourselves up to the place of God. God lowers himself down to the place of man, and he met Jacob where he was at. I love, if you know the rock group U2, they have a song, in one of the lines in that song, Jacob wrestled with the angel and the angel was overcome. I love the line, but it's theologically wrong. This is not about, could me and Carrie get into a wrestling match, who would win? It's not about Jacob's strength versus the man's strength, but it is about Jacob's determination in the face of the unknown. As he wrestles with God, let me just couch it this way. He didn't get his way immediately. Have you ever been there when you wanted something and you wanted it desperately and you had to deal with no? I have found that a no is one of the things that many people spiritually are not equipped to answer. I had a member of one of my churches. He had joined there and really seemed enthusiastic. He was a small business owner in the area where we worked, or where the church was. And I found out later he had an agenda. You see, the business was kind of ebbing away. Things were changing in town, and his business did not have the economic footprint that it once had. And he came to church basically saying, God, I'll give you me, but you got to give me some more business. And you know what? A year or so later, he left the church. After not seeing him for a little while, I went and said, hey, Steve, I hadn't seen you for a while. He says, well, I tried the church thing, but business isn't any better. In other words, he wrestled with God, and when he didn't get the answer that he wanted, he cut and run. When this, if you want to call it an angel, or if you want to call it the Lord himself, when this divine figure wrestled with Jacob through the night, the morning's coming, and in the morning, he's got to make a choice. He's got to do something. It's not because this figure is afraid of the daylight, but it's time, and he realized that Jacob would not stop. I see something in that, the angel said. I see something special in that. What do you want from me? Now, what would you have said? I want you to take care of my problem. I want you to change Esau. I want you to do away with his anger. And I want you to make him love me like a brother should love me. I want you to get him to forgive me. I want you to change that. But he said, no, I want you to bless me. I'm going to reinterpret that for you this morning. I want you to give me of yourself that which only God can give. He didn't name a specific about his problem. He said, I want what you have. And that's when God gave him something that he never imagined. Because the angel didn't say, I'll take care of Esau. He said, let's deal with Jacob. It's an interesting fact, and what I'm kind of talking about here is you have to know the difference in your life between what you want for yourself and what God wants for you. But then you will find in prayer, we often go to God in prayer hoping that we can get God to change things, and God says, I can change things, and I know exactly where I would like to start. Who needs to change? Esau? All the soldiers that Esau has now under his household that are going to be accompanying him to the meeting tomorrow? And the angel said, maybe that's not who I need to deal with. What's your name? Trickster. Let's give you a new name. Favored of God, or prince with God. That's what Israel means. Israel, the name that we still apply to a nation. It has to do with a willingness, a tenacious willingness to stick with God even when it's difficult. Even when we are threatened, even when we want everyone else to change. And God says, yeah, but I want you to change. In the 1960s and early 1970s, I don't know if y'all, my dad being a newspaper guy, we always had a newspaper in the house. And to this day, I don't like to read a newspaper. That was Dad's thing, except on Sunday. Because on Sunday, we had what we called the funny papers, the in-color comics. And oh, we loved those. Now, 1971, I was a little bit too young to remember, but Dad often pointed to one of the comics that the comic writer mentioned something quite profound. Do you remember the little figure of Pogo? Kind of like Dobie Gillis. He was the kind of guy that trying to figure life out. And in one of those comics, he said, we have met the enemy, and the enemy is us. I even found that comic online. And I'll tell you, friends, when you go to wrestle with God, you may think your biggest problem is probably out there tomorrow, what you're about to face. And God will inevitably come back to you. I have a new favorite saying. I've used it a couple of times this week. Life doesn't come with a remote, so you'll probably have to get up and change it for yourself. And your process of growth and transformation does not come with a remote. You are going to have to engage for yourself in this process of growth. You will have to go down to the river and wrestle with God. And like Jacob, you will find that it exacts a price from you. We have this wonderful story about how the man, the angel, the Lord, touched him in the hip and he went away limping. And I'm here to tell you there's been more than one occasion when, after wrestling with God, I went back to face life and I felt hobbled. That's how my dad felt in 1960-something when the Winston-Salem Journal, it paid him a pretty decent salary, had laid down the law. I actually faced the exact same thing in 1997. I was working for Henry Don Furniture. I made about $36,000 a year. The little church I was at paid about $15,000 a year. Henry Don gave benefits. The church didn't. Henry Don took out taxes. The church didn't. And one day we were working 60-hour weeks in 5 days, and I mean I was dragging. And the boss came by and said, we're going to work Saturday. And I hadn't had a bit of time in the office. I said, I can't do it. If we were working 8-hour days, it'd be one thing, or 9-hour days, but we're working 10, 11 hours a day on Monday through Friday, and you want me all day Saturday? Saturday is a day I've set aside to prepare for Sunday. And he kind of looked at me, and he said these exact words. I want you to know we support you having a church. That's not a problem. But what you do on Sunday is your business, and if it interferes with Monday through Saturday, then that's just like having a second job. And that's a problem. And he went off to the office. He's told me. And I had to wrestle with God. And he came walking back out of the office, and I motioned, come on over. I said, I've thought about what you said. And you're absolutely right. I do have a second job, and it's Henry Don, and I can change that today. You see, the example that my father had set back in the 1960s where he had to let go of one job, and his only answer was, the Lord will take care of you. My dad walked out of the Winston-Salem Journal, and the next day he had to go job hunting. And he ended up at a little institution called the Mount Airy News, where they hired him on the spot. And over the next couple of years, he worked his way up to be the editor of that paper, and he turned it into the largest semi-daily paper in the state of North Carolina. My dad preached in more churches than I'll ever imagine, because so many people says that editor of the paper, he's a Christian, he's a pastor, he has something to say about God. And my father would have never had those opportunities, but it cost him. So many times we let go of the wrestling with God because we don't get the answer we want. And what we desperately need to do is go down to the river and receive what God wants to give us. And so often he wants to give us a new identity. That new identity begins with accepting the salvation that he wants to give. But friends, so many Christians fail in that they think once they get wet in the baptistry, they're done, and they never grow what God wants to give. That new character is something that you must struggle to grow. Y'all like to garden? Do you like fresh corn and tomatoes? I do. My wife tells me every year, you don't need to plant corn. Don't plant corn. We can buy corn. That's all right, I'm going to plant. The deer are going to eat our corn. Okay, I'll shoot the deer. And she tells me I'm not supposed to do that, so I have to wait till she's gone. But one of the things I've learned is if you want the benefit of fresh produce, you got to sweat out in the garden. And if you want the sweetness of a reshaped character, you can sit on your pew and wait for God to do it for you, or you can begin to wrestle with God, and he'll say, let's look at this in your life. Let's look at that. You're the one who needs a new name. Esau, I'll take care of Esau in his own time. Do you need to go down to the river? Do you need to honestly say, Lord, this is what I want, and then humbly accept, but I want to receive what you want to give? As Judy comes, we prepare to close our service, she's going to play in just a moment and offer you the time to reflect. I'm not going to ask anyone to come down. But perhaps there in the powerful intimacy of you and God, you would travel down to the river. And you would say, God, this is where I'm at. And maybe your God say, but this is where I want you to be. When you rise up, you will either have to follow the old character or the new. The old direction or the new. Obedience or disobedience. That's the choice we make. God's people are called to change the world. And to do that, we must accept God's new character. We invite you during this time to travel down to the river all by yourself and see what God would say to you. That angel announced, the sun's rising. It was another way of saying, it's time to get up and choose the direction you're going to go. That time is for you and for me. You have come in, and I hope that you have drawn strength from the Lord your God. Now go and shine. Be beacons of light in a world that has so much darkness. And carry what God has done in you and for you out to the world so that he can now touch them through you. I hope that you will come back the next time and bring your friends. If you are joining with us online in our live feed, thank you so much for joining with us. We hope that you'll be back with us each week. We're growing our technology and we want to continue to minister to you. God bless. I hope that you have enjoyed our message today. And I hope this message gives you something to ponder on in your heart. Let this process of, yes, wrestling with God be a part of your spiritual journey. And I hope that as you journey down to the river alone, you will climb back up and rejoin the community of faith. We would love to see you with us at Union Hill Baptist Church. I'm Pastor Rick, wishing each of you a blessed day.